Captain. Pan, 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 pan. Requesting return. We want to come back. Controller, nervously. Do you need any help for landing? Like emergency vehicles or any other support? Captain. No. Everything seems normal right now. We will land using the ILS. As soon as the captain says this, he starts manually controlling the plane and aligns it with the center of the runway for landing. But as soon as the plane touches the runway, a terrible fire erupts. In just 70 seconds, more than half of the plane is reduced to ashes. This is the story of Aeroflot Flight 1492, which departed with 78 passengers on board. But what exactly happened that caused this plane to be engulfed in flames during landing? Who was at fault? And were there any survivors in this tragic accident? May 2019. Aeroflot Flight 1492 is getting ready to depart from Sheremetyevo Airport in Moscow, Russia to Murmansk. The plane has a total of 78 people on board, comprising 73 passengers and 5 crew members. This plane is a Russian-built Sukhoi Superjet 100, which is actually a new aircraft. Before this flight, it had operated for approximately 2,710 hours and completed 1,658 flights. Aeroflot Flight 1492 is under the control of 42-year-old Captain Denis Yevdokimov, who has 6,844 flying hours of experience. Along with the captain, 36-year-old First Officer Maxim Kuznetsov is also on board with 773 hours of flying experience. This is a routine flight, but the weather isn't quite good at the moment. There are extremely severe thunderclouds in the sky, with heights ranging from 6,000 feet to 29,000 feet. This type of weather is quite common in the Moscow area during spring and summer, especially around Sheremetyevo Airport. Such clouds and thunderstorms are normal during these seasons. Pilots and airlines are specially trained for such conditions. They have proper tools and procedures in place to safely operate the flight. Now, while this weather condition may not be unusual, it is definitely challenging, and the pilots are already prepared for it. So the takeoff procedure is initiated. The plane is pushed back, and then the taxiing process to reach the runway begins. Visibility around the runway is clear, so the airport control tower grants permission for takeoff. The flight takes off at 6:03 p.m. local time in Moscow. At this time, everything is normal. The plane is ascending gradually, and the autopilot has also been engaged. Just a few minutes later, the pilot begins to relax and enjoy the flight. However, as the plane continues to move forward, the captain's concern also grows, because he knows that he will soon have to face a thunderstorm. For about 2 minutes, the plane continues moving forward without any issues. But as the captain feared, just 3 minutes after takeoff, he starts seeing a large cluster of clouds ahead. The pilots quickly realize that they are facing a severe storm that will be very challenging to navigate through. The plane was supposed to follow a standard route, which meant navigating through the clouds as per the flight plan. However, due to the bad weather and storm, the pilot quickly makes a decision and manually selects a new heading of 327 degrees. This decision was made to avoid the storm zone. But by the time the plane turned right to avoid the storm, it was already very close to it. And then something happens to this plane that no one could have even imagined in their wildest dreams. In fact, while maneuvering to avoid the clouds, at 6:08 p.m., the plane gets struck by lightning. And due to the lightning strike, the plane, which is flying at an altitude of 8,900 feet, experiences a loud buzzing and explosion-like sound, causing panic among everyone on board. At the same time, the plane's lights begin to flicker on and off, leading passengers to believe that they might not survive. In fact, the biggest damage to the plane after the lightning strike was to its electrical systems. Its primary radio and autopilot have stopped functioning. This means that the plane now needs to be manually controlled, which is even riskier in this situation. Seeing all this, the pilots panic for a moment, but quickly regain their composure and take control of the plane themselves. Captain Denis Yevdokimov, who is flying the plane at this time, believes that the best option in this emergency situation is to turn the plane around and land it back at Sheremetyevo airport. But the problem is that without radio communication, bringing it to the correct direction and landing it properly has become an extremely challenging task. Therefore, the pilots of Aeroflot Flight 1492 make a distress call to the Sheremetyevo airport controllers. The situation at this time is very alarming, and they anxiously say, "Pan, pan, 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 requesting return. Flight 1492 has been struck by lightning, and our radio contact has been lost." Saying this, they send an emergency signal. For your information, the pan-pan signal is used when there is an emergency situation on the plane, but it does not pose an immediate threat to life or the aircraft. The pilots and controllers are currently discussing emergency systems, which only allow for very brief messages. Therefore, neither the pilot is able to explain how critical the condition is, nor is the controller able to understand it properly. After this, the controller asks what the emergency is. The pilot responds, "Our radio contact and the plane's automatic flight controls are not working." After this, the controller asks, "Do you need any help with landing?" The pilot then declines, saying that everything is normal and they will be able to land the plane normally. During this time, contact is maintained between the two, with the controller giving directions and assisting the pilot. In the meantime, the pilot says that they will not perform a visual landing, but will instead use the Instrument Landing System, or ILS, to land the plane. As soon as the pilot says this, contact with the controller is lost, meaning they now have to handle everything on their own. But the biggest challenge at this time is the weight of the plane, because it has become quite heavy due to the excess fuel, and landing under these conditions can be quite difficult. In such conditions, fuel is usually jettisoned from the plane, but at this time, they are flying over the city of Moscow, where jettisoning fuel is not appropriate. In such a situation, the pilot considers using the overweight landing technique for landing. They turn the plane to align it correctly with the runway, but it ends up a bit off-center from the runway's middle. Now, to bring it into the correct position, they go around. This time, the plane has finally come into the correct direction, and the captain is ready for landing. According to the overweight landing technique, they set the flaps to 25 degrees and increased the approach speed. Now the plane is descending for landing, and everyone's heartbeat has quickened. Suddenly, several warning systems activate simultaneously, and warnings of go around, and wind shear ahead start appearing in the cockpit.
Don't sink, don't sink, don't sink.
This clearly indicates that the weather and wind conditions are not suitable for landing at the moment, and they should go around again. but the pilots ignore these warnings and continue with the landing. The plane has now aligned with the center of the runway and begins to land slowly. The aircraft touches down approximately 900 meters beyond the runway threshold. At this time, its speed is 158 knots or about 292 kilometers per hour, which is significantly higher than a normal landing speed. At the time of the plane's touchdown, it experiences a jolt, which was approximately equivalent to a force of 2.55 G. The jolt was so strong that the plane bounced off the ground. After this bounce, when the plane returns to the ground, this time the plane's nose strikes the ground. The force of the second impact was around 5.85 G, which is even greater than the first impact. Due to this jolt, the plane's nose and the landing gear, that is, the front wheels, are damaged. After the nose gear strikes the ground with such force, the plane bounces up even higher, and upon descending hits the ground a third time. After this third impact, the plane's wings and the fuel tanks inside them are severely damaged, and the fuel begins to leak from there. 15 to 20 seconds after the third impact, as soon as the fuel starts leaking, a spark ignites, causing a fire in the plane that rapidly spreads to the rear section. Meanwhile, the fire alarms and other security alarms start going off in the cockpit. After the fire starts, the plane runs along the runway like a fireball for a few seconds and finally comes to a stop in the grass beside the runway. As soon as the plane stops, the evacuation process begins swiftly, and people are quickly taken out. Passengers quickly exit through the front door. Meanwhile, the first officer uses the escape rope from the cockpit's right window to get out. Meanwhile, some passengers, not understanding the seriousness of the situation, begin to retrieve their hand luggage, which causes delay in the evacuation. People rush towards the evacuation slides. The slides remain activated for approximately 70 seconds, during which many people are evacuated. However, after this, more than half of the plane becomes fully engulfed in flames, resulting in the loss of 41 lives. Among them were 40 passengers and one 21-year-old flight attendant, Maxim Moiseev, who lost their lives in the accident. However, despite considerable efforts, 37 people were rescued and the fire was brought under control after 45 minutes. Now let's discuss why this accident happened. The primary reason was electrical failure. In fact, when lightning struck the plane, its entire electrical system shut down, causing many of the plane's systems to malfunction. And for the pilots, manually controlling the plane in these weather conditions became quite challenging. The second reason is hard landings. When the plane was landing, its speed was very high, and the height was also not under control. As a result, instead of a smooth landing on the runway, it resulted in a hard landing, and due to the severe jolts, important parts of the plane were damaged. The third reason is the explosion of the fuel tank, which caused a devastating fire in the plane. Additionally, investigators say that the pilot did not handle the landing properly, which caused the plane to bounce again. Caroline Petit, an airliner pilot, wrote that this crash was caused by the pilot's poor landing technique. She also mentioned that a lack of training could be a reason for the crash. Additionally, it is unclear why such a modern plane, the Sukhoi Superjet, was so adversely affected by a lightning strike. After the accident, questions were raised about the emergency response at Sheremetyevo airport, specifically why there was a delay in activating the fire crews. The accident with Aeroflot Flight 1492 shows that small mistakes, which we often ignore, can lead to a major accident. This incident serves as a grim lesson for the aviation industry. demonstrating how even a small mistake during emergencies can escalate into a major disaster. That's all for today. See you in the next video. Until then, goodbye.